Greetings all, and welcome to the 11th episode of the V.T.P, or the Veteran Trainer's Perspective. Today, we are going to take a look on the other side of justice in the main series games, and try to understand what it is exactly that is going through the minds of the major villains that play a role in progressing the storyline of the games, and giving something to fight for other than beating the Pokémon League. Yes, today, we are going to be taking a look at the villainous organizations and their leaders within the main series Pokémon games, and how these people, for the most part, are individuals following a specific doctrine to the extreme and not always outright villains most of the time. The main series Pokémon games are always intended to be a great adventure for all to take upon themselves and make their own, to do what they wish to in pursuit of being the best trainers to ever live. But this alone is not always enough to entice others to rise to the top. We need something else to drive the story forward, to flesh out the world and make it more than just a journey of achievement. And so, just as we see in real life, there are groups that have darker intentions that could have cataclysmic effects on the world around them, as they too pursue a goal that will likely end with them on top and everyone else begging for their mercy. Of course, I am talking about the villainous organizations that exist within the games, and the role they play in not only helping us, the player, feel accomplished in eventually becoming the champion, but also in seeing us stop a true source of evil in the world and being a hero to countless citizens. However, if we really take a look at things, there is more to the story than just giving players some bad guys to defeat. Almost all of the main villains that we see in the games are not truly evil in the purest sense, in that they are not just doing something for the sake of nefarious or selfish deeds. In all actuality, the people that lead these organizations are following an ideology in their minds towards a goal of their design. They are not being evil just for the sake of being evil. They are doing what they do for a reason that, once understood, paints them in a different light and makes them more morally grey as a whole. This makes the player really think about these people and their goals not only within the context of the games, but also in the real-life actions of others, showing that perhaps we should not always judge them based on their actions alone, that there is depth to these characters that can make them more sympathetic. And I believe that the idea of a sympathetic villain, in the least some sense, has always been a part of the franchise. Today, I wish to prove that by taking a look at the main villainous organizations in the main series games, and showing and explaining just what it is they are aiming for, and why they are aiming for that goal in the first place. Let's start off with one that is probably not so obvious, but does make sense in the context of the dialogue provided from the leader of the group in the main series games. Team Rocket and Giovanni. Now, this one obviously seems out of place for the most part. After all, the only goal of Team Rocket is to steal Pokémon and sell them to the highest bidder for money, right? Well, yes, that is true, but that is not what we are here to focus on. The question instead is, why does Giovanni do what he does? Well, I think this can be boiled down into two main points. For one thing, this entire organization is very much meant to be akin to the Mafia, and in that sense, Giovanni views his group more as a business than a group that one is intentionally trying to harm others and ruin the world. Rare Pokémon do make for a lot of money, so capturing them and selling them does make for a tidy business. At the same time though, we can see Giovanni's true approach to his group through battling him in the main series games, and it is a simple ideology that works with the simple nature of the Generation 1 games. Only the strongest deserve to lead. In his mind, Giovanni is the strongest trainer in the region, and possibly the world, and he believes that this is what gives him the right to be so controlling and domineering over all those he meets. We can see this as an actual philosophy of his at the very end of the main series games, when we beat him for the Earth Badge, literally beating him at his best. It is here that he realizes that he is not the strongest trainer after all, for this is not his first, but his third loss to the player character, and as he sees it, 3 strikes and you're out. He realizes that if he truly is not the strongest, then he does not have the right to rule over not just the region, but even his own group, leading him to disband Team Rocket. It is interesting to see though, that his lackeys do not understand the reasoning behind his actions, as in the Generation 2 games, we see that former members of Team Rocket are trying to get him to come back, only to be met with silence at the Goldenrod radio tower. The fact that this led him to pursue the life of an outcast, even to his own son, in order to make himself the strongest once more, shows his dedication to his personal ideology, and in turn, makes him much more than just a standard bad guy when you really look at his actions. Now it is noted that the appearance of a Giovanni as part of Team Rainbow Rocket does seem to skew this a bit, but I would like to argue that his willingness to leave after being defeated at the end of that arc in Generation 7 shows to at least some degree that this ideology is intact, even if it might not be the same Giovanni that is seen in the Generation 1 games. Now let's move on to Generation 3, where things really start to become obvious and the actual focus for many of the games. Here we have teams Aqua and Magma, both of which pursue their goals the utmost in trying to reawaken the legendary Pokémon associated with weather, Kyogre and Groudon. It is hard to call these groups true villains in any right, as more than anything, they are eco-terrorists that are looking to save the world from their own corrupted viewpoints. In the case of Team Aqua, their leader Archie sees the pollution of the waters of the world and the damage it is doing to the ecosystems of the ocean and wishes to fix this by increasing sea level in order to give new places for aquatic Pokémon to explore and live in. At the same time, he believes that this will do the rest of the world a great deal of good as well, as it will give them more places for communities like Pacific Log Town to grow and thrive, allowing for more oceanic communities and a place where the human race can more closely link together with their aquatic relatives. Maxie, on the other hand, as the leader of Team Magma, wishes to expand the amount of land because climate change is causing sea level to rise, which is destroying the homes and lives of people closest to his shore, swallowing them up. More land is needed for the Pokémon that are born of the solid earth and for people to build more communities as both a solution to overpopulation and in general for keeping the lives of those closest to the shore safe from harm. Both of these gentlemen are doing what they believe is best for the world as a whole in order to make more room for both Pokémon and people alike, and from that perspective, you can see that the points that drive them are not completely insane. If anything, they are highly understandable, which is entirely the point of these groups starting from Generation 3 onward. The problems that arise from their desire to go so far as to summon and awaken the slumbering deity-class legendaries associated with extreme weather, only to find too late that they cannot control them as they believed they could, and now have to put the entire world in jeopardy, leaves you, the player character, to stop their antics one way or another. This is where the franchise really took off with the concept of a villainous organization that was trying to do something good, but ultimately ended up failing because of the extremes they went to in pursuit of their ideologies, and the fact that Ruby and Sapphire pitted you against different teams depending upon the version you were playing only made this push that much more obvious, a push to see things as they do and decide in your own heart and mind if they were wrong in their endeavors or just went too far with them. Now we can move on to Generation 4 and talk about one of the more awkward teams introduced in this series, Team Galactic. I say that they are awkward because, unlike the previous two organizations discussed, the members of this organization are not actually aware of what their boss, Cyrus, is actually up to. Minus their commanders, they exist solely to do their job that they was assigned to, and little more, never really questioning just what it is that Team Galactic is really trying to do, and coming off as a bit unintelligent in the process. In truth, if they did know what their boss was planning, they might have thought twice about following their otherwise quite charismatic leader. The front of the organization is that Team Galactic is searching for new sources of renewable energy and are looking to use this to drive the future of the world under their leadership. In truth, however, this could not be further from the real motives behind the actions of their leader. When Cyrus was a young boy, he was a good kid that did well in school and was by all accounts fairly normal, even if he was a bit antisocial and tended to spend more time with machines than he did other people. However, despite being a good student, he didn't seem to live up to his parents' expectations and felt shunned and rejected by them for it. Over time, he slowly began to believe that his emotions and his spirit in general were the cause of his pain, and the only way to truly be at peace and live the life he was meant to live was to use the power of Palkia and Dialga to destroy this reality and create a new one, free of spirit entirely, where he would then rule above all. In this case, we can see that his plans were thankfully thwarted, either by the player character alone or with the help of Giratina, depending upon the version being played, so the world was saved from basically being erased and started anew. But when we put ourselves in his shoes, I can't say that I blame him for the things that he did. I can understand from personal experience what it feels like to be shunned by others, though not necessarily by parents, and it seems that he was driven by an inability to embrace his own emotions because of the pain they caused him in his life, combined with his preference towards machines and developing lack of care for human life. This was a man that believed that the world was better off without spirit, so no one could ever feel the pain like he did ever again, and he was willing to go the distance to fulfill his dreams. Which, in this context, does indeed paint this man in a much more sympathetic light, and shows how even a good student and human being can be twisted and turned dark by the actions of others, and in turn, why it is important that we embrace the fact that we can feel, lest we end up with the sad life that Cyrus developed in his bid to make the world anew as the leader of Team Galactic, even if some of his top commanders thought he was truly insane regarding the lengths he was willing to go to make his dream real. In Generation 5, things take an interesting turn with the introduction of more than just one leader in a single organization. That's right, up next is Team Plasma. The first leader of Team Plasma was N, a mysterious man who has a fairly tragic backstory that helps to define his character as a whole. N was originally discovered by another who saw that he had the miraculous gift of being able to communicate with absolutely any Pokémon that he came across, and he was raised to see Pokémon in a light that no one should ever have to go through. N was only ever allowed to interact with Pokémon that had been hurt by humans, so hurt in some cases that they refused to talk, leading N to believe that humans and Pokémon were not meant for each other, that Pokemon should be liberated from the control of humans in order to give them a better life and a sense of balance in the world. Under this ideology, he set out and managed to grab the power of one of the legendary Tau dragons, and threatened to use it to either use truth or ideals to rule over the Unova region, creating separate worlds where people and Pokemon could live outside of each other and in bliss that he believed could only be obtained through this method. However, by the end of the original Black and White games, we see that N has not only learned that both truth and ideals are needed in order to create and maintain balance in the world, but more importantly, that he was wrong about people and Pokemon needing to be separate, all dotted with a cherry on top in the revelation that he had been used as a pawn, a tool his entire life, and that he was merely a means to an end for the one that adopted him. N went on to become much wiser in his understanding of the importance and power contained within the teamwork between humans and Pokemon, and as such, managed to completely turn around his ideology from the closed-off perspective that he had been raised on his entire life. However, this would not be the end for everything, for Team Plasma returned in the sequels to these two games, though now split into two different sects, and the antagonistic sect was led by a new leader, Colress. In truth, Colress was little more than a figurehead for darker powers, and the only reason why he decided to join and lead Team Plasma was so that he could follow up on his own research into what truly allows Pokemon to bring out their greatest strength. This was not an ideology per se, but by the end of the games it did develop into one, as Colress realized that Pokemon are at their strongest when they are working alongside people, especially in battle, and he aimed to pursue that to the greatest level possible in disbanding Team Plasma once and for all. In the end, both of these individuals had a belief or question in their mind that drove them to commit the actions that they did, but by the end of it all, they had come to form new thoughts and ideologies that would serve to make the world a better place through safe methods, and not the extremes exhibited by many of the other villainous organization leaders that are being analyzed here. Generation 6 introduced us to Team Flair, an organization that, in all honesty, is probably one of the most awkward and disjointed of them all, but acts as a nice example of how different people can view the world yet still work together for a common goal. On the one hand, this group is different from most in that joining it required an actual monetary donation to be a part of it, and the people that are in the group really don't care too much about what is actually going on. They just have a job and they will serve it if it means that they are in the clear when the boss's plans come through. The major scientists that were a part of the group are very much the same in their own way, as they tended to show a sadistic streak towards others in their own Pokemon, minus the lead scientist of the group, Xerosic. The person of real interest here is Lysandre, the leader of Team Flair. Existing as a descendant of the brother of the former king of the Kalos region, AZ, Lysandre was a man that wished to make the world as beautiful and lively as he could, but realized that the ugliness of war and strife would make that all but impossible, something that was clearly shown 3,000 years ago when the actions of AC wiped out almost all life in the region over a selfish desire to save his beloved Pokemon that had perished in a great war. Over time, Lysandre slowly morphed into a misanthrope as he began to hate humanity for its evilness and greed and the competition that came from it, oftentimes leading to the destruction of the beauty he sought in the world. Wishing to end all strife and create the perfect world, Lysandre aimed to use the power of AZ's ultimate weapon to inflict mass genocide across the region, leaving only the people in Team Flair alive. And if that meant destroying all the Pokemon in the world that in their own way fueled this greed and desire for more, then so be it. Even at his most desperate moment, he was disgusted by the idea of never being able to create his beautiful, idealistic world free of greed and strife, and ultimately ended up destroying himself. Lysandre went to great lengths to pursue his goal under the ideals of corruption and evil in humanity, and almost managed to get away with it, but his ultimate defeat helped to save the Kalos region and likely most of the world in turn. Lysandre is not a man that even I can personally say was evil in any way, just someone that had been exposed to too much evil to see the good that humanity still had inherently and with Pokemon at their side, and given the war and strife that occurred today as a result of greed and desire, it can be easy to see why Lysandre was meant and played out to be such a sympathetic character throughout the entirety of the Generation 6 games. Generation 7 is admittedly where things look to be a bit dicey, but follow me on this one as we take a look at the two organizations that serve as antagonists in the main story of these games, Team Skull and the Aether Foundation. Team Skull is probably the more interesting on the two, as the group really doesn't seem to have a main goal to anything other than to cause mischief, but that is the beauty of their existence. They live by the ideology that you should do whatever it takes to survive and to never give up on family. This is ironic given that the group is mainly comprised of kids that were never able to complete the island challenge of the Alola region and was started by a group of people that rose up against the island guardians only to be struck down. But if we take a look at them in the games, this makes sense. These individuals steal and cheat to get whatever they can just to make enough money to survive, since they are effectively shunned by society and have no one they can truly rely on but each other, and that is where the second part of this doctrine comes in, as the members of Team Skull are all friends and closely associated with one another, always working together and guarding each other's backs. This is especially the case with Plumeria, who sees herself and acts like an older sister to all of the grunts, and their leader Guzma, who, though not always seen as the caring type, is very much like a big brother to all the grunts as he works to make the lives of his family members better as a whole, even if it meant working with the Ada Foundation behind the scenes for some very nefarious deeds. This is a direct byproduct of his upbringing, as he was abused as a child by his father and eventually left home because of it, rejecting his family and seeking to make a new, better one where he was cared for and appreciated and where he could do the same for others. And speaking of which, the Ada Foundation, as nice and clean as they looked, did demonstrate a level of malice when it came to following the lead of their boss, Lusamine, though much like Lysandre, her reasoning is much more tragic and understandable. In all of the Generation 7 games, it is explicitly known that she became obsessed with the Ultra Beast after her husband was sucked into an Ultra Wormhole during an experiment, and in both versions, she works in her own way towards learning more about these strange creatures, and under the ideology that all Pokemon deserve to be saved and protected. In Sun and Moon, we see that her obsession led her to have her mind poisoned and warped by a Nihilego, so she became obsessed with creating a safe haven and protecting them and not the rest of the world, seeing through the progression of the story how her ideology of protection and care was twisted into something sinister against her own will. In Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, on the other hand, we see that her desire to protect everyone led her, with the information provided to her on Necrozma from the Ultra Recon Squad, to pursue the monster and tackle it herself, believing her ideology made her the one destined to fight it back and save the region. Of course, she was wrong, and this led to Necrozma stealing the light of the world, but the player character is eventually able to right her wrong and restore the world back to normal. While these two are by far not the most precise examples of the point of ideology being a driving factor, it is a very important factor behind the actions that they take, and thus in at least some indirect fashion serves as the reasoning behind the decisions and actions in the games. Now, before I wrap this episode up, you may have noticed that one person was completely left out of the analysis, at least until now, because there is one glaring exception to the pattern that we have been seeing thus far: Ghetsis. In my personal opinion, in the main series games, Ghetsis is the closest thing to a traditional villain that exists, as his plans do not follow a real ideology, merely a desire that is incredibly selfish and completely self-centered. We learn in the events of the Generation 5 games that Ghetsis was the one who took in and raised N, knowing that he could use his gift and time to rule the region. It was Ghetsis' plan to use N as a figurehead to get trainers to release all of their Pokemon. This was not done to create a sort of separate utopias though, quite the opposite in fact. The truth behind these actions was to leave Ghetsis as the only trainer left in the region that still had Pokemon that he controlled, and thus use them to destroy everyone else and effectively conquer the region for his own selfish desires. This went even farther in Black 2 and White 2, where he instead wished to use the true power of Kyurem to freeze the region and take full control of it, luring N to him so he could force Kyurem to enter an absolute fusion state where its power would become nigh unbeatable. This is some straight up Saturday morning cartoon stuff right here, and it clearly paints Ghetsis as nothing more than pure evil, a true representation of corruption in the world, and makes him the only real villain in the entire main series so far that cannot be sympathized with, and I believe that was entirely the point, a riff on the black and white nature of him and N and the final position by the end of the series. We can also tell that there was nothing good driving Ghetsis because, instead of simply lashing out or reforming at the end of his ambitions near the end of Black 2 or White 2, he has a complete mental breakdown and cannot go any further, completely losing his mind to the point where even his closest allies, the Shadow Triad, insist that he will never be a threat again. Even Lysandre was able to go out with a bang, and not such an anticlimactic whimper. In the end, it is likely justice served, but this man nonetheless exists as a nice point of reference upon which we can at least mark the threat level and evil in the actions of others, and use him as a comparative point to see whether someone is doing terrible things for the sake of some cause, or simply for their own wicked desires. In conclusion, I believe that now it can be seen that, with one glaring exception, the villains that are given to us in the main series Pokemon games are not really evil, but merely individuals that are following a specific pathway of thought and ideas based on their personal ideologies. Their actions have caused great chaos and led to potentially world-ending destruction in some cases, but they are still very much human, and we can see that through the reasoning behind their activities and why they have been led to the extremes that they have. I certainly look forward to seeing where upcoming villains in the future main series games lie on the scale of villainy, if only to see whether or not we will continue to see more sympathetic and understandable villains in time. But for now, that's all the time we have, so stay tuned and keep your eyes peeled for the next episode of the V.T.P. Thank you all for watching this video. It is always an honor to be able to speak with you all on the subject of Pokemon in a way that brings me great joy and happiness in my work. If you would like to keep tabs on past and future work, click that subscribe button, check out my work on DeviantArt, and don't be shy about following me on Twitter. where you can find pertinent announcements on upcoming work before it is officially posted. Links to both can be found in the video description. If you would like to support my work and help Miguel and I continue to produce more content for you and improve upon our presentation, please visit us at my Patreon page, which you can also find a link to in the video description.
Yeah, no.
With that, I thank you for watching and I wish you well.